Africa Science Dialogue, closing the gap between science and society. Hello and welcome to the Africa Science Dialogue podcast. Today I have with me Professor Curtis Youngs, who is a professor of animal science and the M.A. Springer Endowed Chair of International Animal Agriculture and Morel Professor at Iowa State University. He also serves as the Associate Director in charge of livestock and animal for sustainable livelihoods, has had international collaborations in research, teaching, and extension in 15 countries across 4 continents, which is specifically why we have him here, because he has a lot of knowledge of places around the world. Specifically, this time we are talking about Africa. Welcome, Professor, and thank you for honoring us with your presence.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now, we are in a period where we are talking a lot about misinformation and disinformation. And at a time when a lot of technologies are coming up, innovations that are very necessary for the future, especially of the developing world. What do you feel are some of the opportunities that the developing world could miss out of slow adoption of key technologies, and especially in agriculture?
Well, that's a very good question. And before giving you a direct answer, I just want to say that if we believe the estimates that there will be 10.1 billion people on planet Earth that we need to feed by the year 2050, unless we adopt changes, unless we can find ways to deal with climate change and some of the other issues, we are going to see widespread famine. And so I'm very passionate about using science, using technology, and using education to try to reduce global food insecurity. So I'm a very strong believer in agricultural biotechnology, and I think that agricultural biotechnology is like many technologies. If we think about the first automobile that was invented, it's nothing like the automobiles that we have today. And so over time, technology gets refined, it becomes better. Sometimes, in the opinion of some people, when we think about agricultural biotechnology, land, or a lot of land that is not being utilized at all for food production.
And the potential in the vast sorts of land across the continent. But it's estimated that by 2050, more than 50% of the African population will be living in urban areas. And as we can see, somebody was making a presentation the other day in Kenya saying that over 80% of the land is not arable. And the little that's arable is now becoming a concrete jungle. People are building massive houses. It's all turning into real estate. Do we really have this hope of utilizing this land profitably for Africa's future food security?
It's a very challenging topic that you've raised, and I do believe that there is opportunity. What you described, we have a term for it. We call it urban sprawl, where people are buying land that we used to use for food production and instead building shopping malls and homes and apartment buildings and things. But we see some creative solutions around the globe where the local city governments, for example, can pass a regulation that if you are going to take farmland out of production, that you have to include in your new office building or your new apartment building the same amount of space
people that it's beneficial for them, and there's no the experts who probably even leave for education have an interest in coming back to help home?
Very good question. I'm going to speak initially from the perspective of the United States. When we have students coming from international universities and we see the knowledge and the talent and the work ethic they have, of course, it's natural for us to want to keep them in the United States and contribute to the things that we're doing there. But I'm going to use an example of what one government, the government of Brazil, has done. Mm-hmm. They have made massive investments in sending their brightest youth to many different countries of the world free of charge. But there is a repayment requirement. Okay. That if those bright people don't come back, they have to repay what the government spent on their education, which of course is going to be very expensive for international students to pay tuition in a foreign university and the living expenses and everything else. So most of them choose to come back and work within the government, within the Ministry of Agriculture, maybe in the Ministry of Finance or Trade, becoming professors at the university. So there are some creative options to ensure that there's not the brain drain from Africa that has been happening in the past, in all honesty. And so there needs to be some incentive. And one of the ways that you can incentivize people trained globally to come back into their native countries here in Africa is not only to promise them a job with a reasonable salary, but to provide them, for example, with research support, providing them money to buy the equipment so the technology that they learned in that foreign institution, they can actually put to use here in Africa and train African students as graduate students or maybe honors program students at the bachelor's level. So there's some models out there that can really help ensure that there's not this brain drain in Africa, but it does require investment. And we heard one of the speakers at the conference, ABBC 2025 conference yesterday, was that in general, African nations are investing a much smaller percentage of their gross domestic product than what many of the developed nations have done. So this is a challenge, but at the same time, an opportunity. And so I know the governments, no government has all the money that they want to have to spend to support development of their societies, but maybe starting the discussion about how can we maybe redirect some of the government expenditures to increase that investment in research and development. And of course, I'm biased. I'd like to see that in agricultural research and development, but we need to have concurrent technology develops well that will support the innovations in agriculture.
Yeah, and when you speak about redirection of resources, I remember at some point I saw that the whole of Africa was committing the same amount that France was, just France, in space study for, I think, the year 2025. Now, going to the next question, Prof. As technology comes in, as social media, of course, gets the traction it gets, of course, internet penetration keeps on increasing in Africa. There's a rise of commercial activists. There are pseudoscientists who are coming up. Of course, they are getting their money from there. It's a whole career. How to deal with this?
I wish I had a very good answer for you to that challenging question. I am not particularly active on social media, but I'm aware that there are these people who are social influencers. They oftentimes like to speak about controversial topics so they can get more viewers, and they monetize the things they're doing, and it's, for many of them, become their job. And it's a real challenge that we need to be sure that we can educate these social media influencers to be talking about fact-based information and not spreading information that is not accurate. And I'm going to go back to something that's not agriculture, but most people are very familiar with the SARS-CoV-2 virus that led to our pandemic. Many people died and suffered because of that. And when we think about the COVID vaccines, just think about all the stories that went about, if you're getting a vaccine, they're putting a microchip in you, so they're going to spy on you. And if you get the COVID vaccine, you're going to die because it paralyzes your nervous system. And there were all sorts of comments being made that, from my perspective, and I'm not an expert in this field, but from the reading that I've done, many of these comments did not seem to have any basis in fact. But just as we see in many parts of the world, even the television media, they exist because they need to sell advertisements. And so they want to attract viewers. Newspapers want to attract readers. And one of the ways to do that is to talk about controversial things, because it's kind of boring for most people to have a story about, here's a star honors program student that graduated from secondary school with perfect marks and got a scholarship to go to the university. That's good news.
Yeah,
it's something news. I believe we should be talking more about.
Yeah, sure.
But it doesn't help generate the advertising revenue.
Yeah.
And this is one of the roles I think government can play to ensure that, whether it's through the agricultural extension system or something similar, to be sure that we're making science-based, fact-based information readily available to members of the public. In the past, sometimes we've tried to get that information in the hands of policymakers, but it's important now because most everyone has a smartphone these days, and they're on X or Instagram or watching YouTube and TikTok videos and things. So we need to make high quality factual information available to those who are talking about these topics in the social media networks.
Yeah, which is why I feel like there's even a big danger, because a lot of political leaders and presidents made a lot of false statements during COVID-19, and some have continued to do so. So I think this kind of emboldens the conspiracy theorists out here, seeing as a whole. Now the battle is taken to the president by the scientists, and of course it can't be a very, very, I think it's a very big problem, which is why probably you need to be on socials.
Yeah. One of the challenges that we face with the COVID-19 pandemic it was something that I don't think there was a single person alive on this planet that had ever experienced something like this before.
Mm-hmm.
And I've given an analogy, which isn't a perfect analogy, but if you think about a forest fire, you have this raging fire burning out of control. And then all of a sudden, the wind changes from a different direction, and the fire starts going in a different direction. And a little bit later, the wind will shift again. And so if you're a firefighter trying to battle this forest fire, it was very difficult because what you were fighting was changing all the time. And as we were dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic, something brand new for our humankind, we used the information available to us to make our best educated guesses of how to deal with it. But as research continued to go on and more information was learned, sometimes we learned that what we thought was true at the beginning wasn't true. And I think not everyone in as general members of society understands that research by definition is doing something that we don't know what the outcome is. If we knew what was going to happen with every research study, there wouldn't be a need to do research.
Yeah, there wouldn't be need.
And so what we try to do as scientists and as researchers is to design experiments so that we can answer specific questions. Sometimes, and I might even be so bold to say many times, we develop a hypothesis of something the way we think it's going to happen, but we do the experiments and the data tells us that our hypothesis or our guess of what was going to happen is wrong.
It's wrong, yeah.
So then we have to do another study to address a different question. And I think this is where, as scientists, we've been guilty of not engaging enough with the media. And I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm not trying to be critical of anyone, but early in my career as a researcher, I was interviewed a few times by people writing, whether it's a television report or a newspaper article, magazine article. And when the end product was released, I didn't feel it was representative of what I had said and the message that I wanted to convey. And so I think my experience was similar to many other scientists, and our way of dealing with it wasn't the right way. But we said, if we're going to be misquoted and things taken out of context, we're just not going to talk to the media. Well, what we unknowingly did is gave space for other people who didn't have that firsthand knowledge to tell whatever story they wanted to tell. So our ABBC 2025 conference, where we're looking about this war on science and all the misinformation and disinformation that's going on, we have recognized as a scientific community, we need to change what we are doing. And something simple like consulting journalists who specialize in scientific communication as we're developing research ideas and developing grant proposals, bring them in on the conversation so that we have a better understanding of how society may perceive this topic that we're proposing to do research on. So I think there's a lot of benefits of kind of developing a new model, enhancing communication with different segments of society so that the people in the general public who are not researchers, they're not scientists, that we can explain to them in terms that they understand why are we doing the things that we're doing and what are the problems that we are hoping to solve to make society a better place for everyone.
Yes. Can I challenge you to join social media one of these fine days?
Yes, I know it's something I need to do, and but I feel in some regards ill-equipped, to do it. I'm happy, for example, there's a more or less scientific version of social media called LinkedIn, and I'm not trying to promote that one to the exclusion of others, but I will, for example, post when I have a research publication come out in one of the scientific journals. I use that to share what we're doing, but I need to take that one step further and translating that down for consumption by the general public. And so I might need to work with someone like you to teach me, how to do a good job of that.
This is a partnership we are signing right now. So also, Professor, something else. Now, I was thinking in the face of misinformation and disinformation, and even as activists keep on coming up in places like Africa, going to the communities down there, how do you feel our education system probably needs to be changed in such a way that we have more informed people in general, in such a way that even though our experts are probably gone out there in other countries and doing whatever they are doing, the general public actually has a good understanding of what's happening. Once, because you've interacted with Africa for quite some time, do you feel like generally we have a problem with our curricula? We have a problem with, I know in some places the literacy levels are quite poor, in such a way that people are unable to break away from some of the cultural beliefs that make them skeptical to new technology and stuff like that. So do you feel like it has something to do with our education systems? And do you think that there's something that could be done to tweak that to make the general public, even at the lowest levels of education, kind of alive to new tech?
Again, you are asking very challenging questions. I don't want to make a general statement to say that there's problems with the education system in Africa, because there are some excellent universities, there are some excellent secondary and primary schools around. But if we were to talk about the average situation across a particular African nation or across all African nations, based on Iowa State University's presence in Uganda for more than 20 years, where we are engaging with primary schools, we do work with secondary schools. I do see that clearly there are opportunities to enhance the curriculum. And one of the things that we are trying to do with our program in Uganda is to introduce gardening skills, poultry rearing skills, and things at the primary school level. And this is having the added benefit of not only teaching those skills that those pupils can take back to their families and their communities where they live, but the products of what these pupils are raising can be incorporated into the school lunch program. So it's a way to try to diversify what the traditional school lunches have been like, try to incorporate maybe some animal source proteins, some variety of different greens and things, and maybe considering something like grain amaranth as a cash crop. As maybe it's not a traditional thing that the farmers have raised, but if we can teach them about some alternative cash crops, that gives those families the opportunity to buy some of the things that their family needs, even though they can't raise them on their farm. So I'm going to use my own state of Iowa, which is a very important agricultural state in the United States. We're located in the center of the country. But there's a group called Iowa Farm Bureau, and it's, in very simplistic terms, farmers pay a membership fee to this organization who tries to monitor things that are going on in terms of public policy at the federal and the state level, and trying to do lots of things to enhance agriculture and farming as a business. One of the things that they did for our Iowa primary schools is they developed a curriculum that they gave to the public school districts called Agriculture in the Classroom, or Ag in the Classroom. And this was one organization's way of trying to make it easy for teachers who wanted to teach about agriculture. They didn't have to spend the time developing the curriculum. It was developed for them. And then as the teachers were wanting to use that, they knew exactly who to contact, saying, I don't understand this. Can you help give me a better explanation so I'm not teaching it wrong? So I think that's one of several solutions that we could think about enhancing the curriculum. And the government, I know there's not enough money, and this is where farm organizations, or perhaps even private sector companies who are making profits from the agricultural products, goods, and services that they sell, if we can convince them to start investing some of those profits into curriculum enhancement, I think it could do wonderful things all across the globe.
We're looking at the final question at superintelligence right now and AI, and you as a university professor, thinking back to the time that Isaac Newton sat down and, just came up with calculus, and, Einstein did what he did. So many people had to struggle through rigorous and painstaking mathematics and everything. Do you feel like the AI age is bringing up a little lazier students? Or do you feel like the younger students or the upcoming scientists are probably losing a lot of the fundamental skills or abilities to do research, because a lot of that can be done by AI?
Yes, artificial intelligence, AI, is in my opinion, a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great opportunities where artificial intelligence can help society, but there's also some potential issues with it. But before I continue answering that, I want to talk about mathematics and calculators. All right. Now, I'm not quite old enough. I wasn't forced to use a slide rule. But if you think about older generations, they learn to multiply and divide and add and subtract and do everything with pen and paper.
Yes.
And they use the slide rule for doing some calculations. Well, then along came the calculator. The calculator makes it very easy. If you want to go and buy a product and say it's a certain price per kilo, and you want to compare products that are packaged in different sizes, most people today will get their calculator out. And of course, there's a calculator app on most people's phones, and people have forgotten how to do math in their head. And I do think there's a danger with artificial intelligence that if we don't teach students how to use it as a tool to supplement their own intelligence, as opposed to using AI as a tool to replace their own thinking, there's the danger. But I'm going to give you an example of a course that I teach at my university. And I gave an assignment to the students. And one of the students very clearly used some form of artificial intelligence to answer the questions on the homework assignment. And when I got the assignment and was grading it, and it started off and saying, well, if a person wants to control the reproductive cycle of a cow and blah, 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 clearly written in a way that no student that I've taught in the last 10 years has ever written. And to make a long story short, the answer that artificial intelligence gave was wrong. And why was it wrong? Because the student was not specific enough in what question and the details that was asked of the artificial intelligence platform. Okay. And so the student, one could say, was being a little bit lazy rather than using the student's own brain and trying to look at the calendar and drawing things out to be sure that they had the right answer, just relied upon artificial intelligence. So I'm actually this semester going to give assignments where I show the output from a question I asked artificial intelligence, and I'm going to ask my students to tell me, is this the correct answer? And if so, why? If it's an incorrect answer, why is it wrong? And what is the correct answer? So this is my own personal way of making students realize that artificial intelligence is good for many things, but we have to ask the right question to get the right answer.
Yeah. Okay, Professor, I think that was my last question, unless you have a parting shot.
I think I'd just like to encourage all of your listeners to really understand the importance of investing in agriculture and agricultural biotechnology, because as a global society, we have a challenge of feeding the world. And there was a man who was born in the state of Iowa, Norman Borlaug, who went on to become a very famous plant scientist, graduated from the University of Minnesota. He received the Nobel Prize in 1970 for his developments in breeding varieties of wheat that could grow in very difficult growing conditions. And it was credited of saving the lives of millions of people in Mexico and in India. And when he accepted the Nobel Prize, one of the things that he said is that food is the moral right of all people born into this world. And right now, unfortunately, estimates are that we have about 800 million people going to bed hungry every night on our planet. And that's a much higher percentage of people dealing with hunger and malnutrition than what I'd like. So I think Africa, its scientists, its leaders have an opportunity really to use the natural resources that are existing here, including the human resources, to help really improve the situation for food production and food security.
Okay. Yeah, as you've heard it, Professor Curtis Young sees the opportunity in Africa. And there's the story I've told about the person who wanted to bring a certain company in Africa, and somebody discouraged them and said, no, you cannot, because people there cannot just buy into this. They don't have the money. And the other guy said, that's the opportunity, because people actually have not experienced this good. They don't have the money. They don't have the willingness. I'm going to take that and turn it into an opportunity for myself. Professor Curtis Youngs, he has interacted with the Global South as much as he has with the North, a lot of wealth of experience and very great insights into that. But one thing we have to make sure is that he joins social media and communicates to us a lot about some of these things. Otherwise, the miscommunicators always find a way to speak louder than the scientists who are actually doing the actual job. Thank you very much for coming on to this podcast.
You're very welcome.
And thank you very much for sharing those interesting and very exciting insights. We hope to see you again to broaden the discussion and probably talk about some other different things. But in the meantime, asante sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This is the Africa Science Dialogue.